Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is a former guest of the podcast, Barry James, and he's well, what do we call you? A humane economist? Is that? How's-
Humane economics is one of the things I do. I've got a technology background. I never know what people should call me.
He's a
Uh,
smart guy who's got a lot of things to say. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to turn it over to him and let him ask the questions because he's got great questions, and I'd like to learn. I will learn from, and we will all learn from Barry by the questions he's asking me. So it should be interesting. Welcome.
I'm delighted, Ed, to be here again. I really enjoyed our time last time, and I've been looking forward to being back. I didn't expect, I have to say, for you to turn the tables on me.
I
I'm
didn't
really,
either until I thought, okay, I think we can do this.
yeah. So let's see where we go. Now we did that because we had a conversation just now about the changes that we're seeing and a flowering beginnings, perhaps, or green shoots of hope. And the some of the reasons for that. Would you talk a little bit about that for now, please?
I I listen to people and observe what they're saying and observe what they're doing, and I'm finding, particularly in the last year, yeah, beginning maybe January of last year, I saw a mindset shift begin to take place where people were more optimistic about the future. And what is it they're optimistic about? Well, is I've tried to kind of get at that. My sense is that they're beholding the beholdenness, that is a word, to
Yeah.
the corporate mindset or to the institutional mindset that had dominated their life and their careers is I don't want to say it's cracking, but it's fading, and that they're beginning to say there are things that they want for their life work wise that these institutional structures cannot provide them any longer.
Mm.
And some of that is freedom, some of that is greater agency, some of that is a sense of connectedness to people that the old managerial structure did not allow.
Yeah.
I think what people are looking for more now is a sense of community or a sense of connectedness with people. And and when and I'll describe it a, a little of this in this way.
Mm.
People have in various groups of men have said um, there seems to be something changing. There's a change happening. I said, well, what do you think it is? I said, I don't know, but it feels different. They're feeling something. And then I offer a thought to them that what is changing is people's perception of themselves or their sense of identity.
Yeah.
That for many people in the West, their whole sense of identity was formed by the company that they worked for,
Yeah.
and their the values that they held as important for themselves were congruent with the values of the company. And so
Yeah.
they were, in that sense, married they had a kind of a marriage relationship where they shared the same values.
Yeah.
And that what happened during the pandemic was the breaking of that closeness, because they
Mm.
were in the office every day. Now they were at home and they were doing some different things, hearing different people speak, and all of a sudden there was some distance growing between them and the company. And
Mm.
and when they were asked to go back to work in the office, they said, "I don't want to do that. I like working from home." So they
Mm.
quit. This ghosting, I think the word, and
Yeah.
it really, I think, goes to a point of what is my identity? Who am I as a person in the workforce or in society?
Mm.
And and my sense is that it is very difficult for us to define who we are as an individual, but I believe that we are actually known by how we are known by other people. So other people kind of give us the indicators and the signals that help us to define who we are. So we actually need one another, need to be in communication, and need to be in support of one another in order for us to actually have a clear sense of identity.
Yeah, this is really important and really interesting. There's a saying that we often use around here that context is everything.
Yeah,
Uh, and in a sense, culture is everything as well,
yeah,
because we it's the water we swim in. I'll say mentally, but our minds swim in, and it forms the way that we see the world. Let me tell you a little bit of a story of how I know and understand a bit about this. Partly because I studied psychology and I've been fascinated um, with microcultures, and then up at every level since, and got to think a lot about how minds come together and interact and form new bodies and cultures and ethos. And there's a whole area of largely unstudied stuff. I can't call it psychology because it's beyond psychology there. But I can tell you this, that there was a point in my personal experience, my life, when I actually lost all of those things. I lost my company that I built from scratch. I don't often tell this story for obvious reason, perhaps, but I lost my family. I was divorced. I didn't have a home, so I was literally a nomad, B&Bs and that sort of thing for a little while. And my future. So I was literally cut off from all but the slenderest of human sustenance in terms of identity. And I can tell you that was excruciating. It wasn't the loss of the status or the money or the convenience, although they all mattered too. But the most painful part of that was the excruciating feeling naked,
mm,
an excruciating feel of naked in a freezing wind, because um and so we draw our identity, don't we, from those things that you mentioned, from a lot from our job,
yeah,
a lot from our relationships. And some people say that you'll end up as the 5 people you're closest to. So there's this effect that we really don't we kind of, because we think it's just normal, we don't even look at it, and it's incredibly important. So hybrid working literally put people in a different context for all of the time, um, and uh, uh, and you used the word agency before, so a sense of increased agency. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
sure. Um, the conversation, one of the conversations I've had recently, I think it was maybe one of my interviews for the podcast. We were talking about how the managerial structures of many corporate global institutions is such that it doesn't allow for um, personal initiative to be taken by
Yeah.
the employee. There, this is what you have to do, and we expect you to do it, and we expect you to take as much time, all the time that it needs to be done. So we're not, you're not on the clock, but you're on the clock. I mean, it's those sort of things, and that sense of agency, which I define human agency. I'm borrowing from Harry Frankfurt and Charles Taylor, two philosophers who talk about human agency in terms of two things. One is there's the first level of agency is just the instinctual. I know I'm hungry, or I know I need some sleep, so I'm going to go take a nap. The second level of human agency is the one where we're able to make qualitative decisions I know that I'm hungry, and therefore I'm going to choose to go have a steak rather than I'm going to go have an ice cream cone. I know what I need, and I need protein more than I need some sugar. That's a human agency decision. Or I'm gonna decide to leave the company and go start my own company, or I'm gonna work from home, and I'm gonna ask that they allow me to continue to work from home, even though they're asking me to come back to the office. And
Mhm.
so that those decisions, human agency decisions, are qualitative, evaluative kind of decisions that we make that are making distinctions about the life that we want to have. And what I'm seeing is that people are wanting to make more of those decisions for themselves instead of having to simply follow what is directed to them by the organizational structure.
Yeah, I was talking to one of our mutual friends actually the other day, and we were talking about how, thinking time, and the extent to which people do that, take time to think or have time to think. There was a stat, I can't remember the precise one, but basically there's a high proportion of the population, it turns out, that don't have an internal dialogue.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean they don't think? I'm not sure about that. I think maybe they think in a different way. But it does raise a question, and I think what's become clear is that not for everyone, but for an awful lot of the population, they're so busy. There's so much to get done, and they have so little time to live a life, to get done the things that they have to get done for themselves, that it leaves little or no time for thinking. And for a lot of people, the only time is when they get a holiday. And by the time they've unwound and are in a position to be able to give some thought to what matters to them, it's time to go back to work. And I begin to think of this a little like the Victorian prisons here, where troublesome people would be sentenced um, uh, um, to prison with hard labor, which just sounds like punishing them further. But actually, there was a reason for it, because if you had a rebellious spirit on your hands, if you put them on the treadmill when they woke up in the morning, and only let them off when they were so exhausted that all they could do was flop down to sleep, then you've solved your rebelliousness problem. And I see a bit of a parallel here. And I suspect that most of the people you talk to, um, perhaps have a little bit more than that. What do you think?
Well, I think what we're experiencing, and I think we're at the beginning of this. So this will be a trend line that we'll see. I mean, you and I will see this for the rest of our lives, and it will not be completed before we pass away. So I think this is going to be a long trend line, and that trend line is that most of the way work has been organized in the world is a reflection of the old industrial model.
Yeah.
And you have a task to do, and you're assigned to do that task. And it does not require creativity, does not require um, abstract decision making skills. It doesn't require anything other than to do that which you have been assigned to do. And this is what this other conversation was, talking about the kind of the managerial model being how we manage people.
Mhm.
But is what is occurring, and this has been ongoing for some time. I mean, I was seeing um, evidence of of the changes of how organizations are structured. I mean, I think back maybe 10 years ago when Zappos was talking about creating the flat structure,
Mhm.
which failed. I mean, it failed for them, but because it was too simple. It was it just treated everybody as the same. Well, everybody's not the same, and you have to create a a social environment of interaction and mutual accountability and mutual trust, where people can work together and they can solve problems together. They can collaborate together. See, I think that's what is emerging, and with people that you know and I know, that's a common conversation point now, is
Yeah.
talking about how collaboration can be developed within organizations. And in many places, they don't know what that means. I mean, they know the word, but they don't really know how do we collaborate? Because in in so many structures, this is the last thing I'll say in this point,
Mm.
is that there is it's not collaborative, it's competitive. And the egos within the team are constantly at war with each other to try to see who's going to be the most influential within the team. And but I was talking to someone this week, and they were talking about how people are working on a team where whoever really has the expertise for that moment steps into the leadership role. And they were talking about this as if this was kind of a new thing. I said, well, it's not a new thing. You can go back, 60 years to the 1960s and Robert Greenleaf and his servant leadership idea, where he saw leadership within a team as leadership by the first among equals. So
Mm.
whoever has the capability or the knowledge or whatever, they're the ones who step forward to lead the team in that moment. Someone else will do it at another time. So everyone is learning how to be leaders, but also followers at the same time, and that has an effect upon one's sense of identity. And you
Yeah.
wonder if they take that kind of experience and translate that into other places where they're involved outside of work.
You're absolutely right. It isn't you at all. One of my delights and a privilege is that I um, get to interact with the Yidinji people, who I'm an ambassador for their government. I should say for our government, shouldn't I really? But the Yidinji nation are an ancient culture that still live on their ancestral territories near the Great Barrier Reef, in what you or I would most easily recognize as Australia. They don't call it that for obvious reasons, but a culture that goes something like 60,000 years. And I mention this because I was talking to them recently about how they have a very modern government, but they've kept their governance model, which is different. And the way that works with the elders isn't that there's one, chief guy who gets to make the final decision. There is a chief, but the chief's role is more as a steward. And
Yeah.
everyone will have an opinion. Everyone's entitled to an opinion. All the elders will talk about their thoughts, but they will all defer to the person who is accepted as having the most experience and wisdom on the subject. I think that's really interesting, isn't it?
It is. Pierre Clastres, who was a French anthropologist, who died way too young back in the 70s, but he did his field work with the Amazonian tribes of Brazil. And what he discovered is it's a very interesting thing, and I encourage people to go track him down, because I think it is such an alternative view of the way a society can work. He called it a society against the state.
Mm.
And he says they would have a chief would be elected, and the chief's job is to speak to the tribe of who they are, constantly reminding them of their identity, of what their values are. And the chief's job is to provide the means for the income they need to manage the tribe, to grow the tribe. But the chief has no um, power over anyone within the tribe. So it's a position of responsibility, and
Mm.
there are aspects of that which are problematic. But the fact that the chief is responsible for, and they're not in a, they're not in a. He said it was not a situation where there was an accumulation of wealth. No, there was only the need for what is needed for the daily requirements for the tribe. That
Mm.
was what he was responsible for.
Mm.
And and he said he called this as this is not primitive in the sense that well they just have not advanced to create a state. He says no,
Mm.
this is an intention to not to be like that. He says because when you create a state government or a federal government, what you're doing is you're placing one group of people over and against another group of people within the society.
Yeah, and it's very different, isn't it? Uh, um, Now, interestingly, you going back to what we were talking about in terms of the increasing um, freedom, a degree of freedom from what might have been a more complete enveloping of people, within the corporate culture. I mean, clearly, I think pretty well everyone now knows and gets that the rising generation, um, whichever label XYZ, millennial, and so on, we look at, but there's definitely a real sense of independence of aspirations, let's call them.
Right.
Uh, how does that relate to what you're seeing? I think by the sounds of it, but above in the generation that the more senior generation.
I see that there is a tremendous generational conflict that we're watching unfold. So
Mm.
I talk with Gen Zers. I have three Gen Z, no, excuse me. I have three millennial children,
Yeah.
and they're married. They have millennial spouses. But I
Mm.
also know Gen Zers who have a different mindset, and the Gen Zs are very interesting because they look at the structure of society and they don't see it a place for them in it, and so they're not interested in it. And uh, and what I have found is that you get my generation, Boomer generation, and Gen X generation critical of the millennials and the Gen Zers because they're not doing what they are expected to do.
Yeah.
But my response to them is they're doing they're responding to the world you created. So if you don't like what they're doing, then you have to decide how am I going to change to create an environment where they will want to be a participant in the world that you have created. And that's I think the real dividing point I think generationally that we're facing is that my generation, which is still in charge, I don't know how old you are, but you're probably a baby boomer.
I'm kind
Our
of with you. Yeah.
generation is still in charge. I mean, we got these old people running for office here in the U.S. Why are they running for office? Where are the Gen Xers? Where are the millennials? Why aren't they not running?
Mm.
It's crazy. It's really crazy. But you see, we want to. Our generation wants to hold on to power and wants to hold on to privilege because we think it's ours, and their grandchildren don't see it that way. And
Mm.
and now, what will really be interesting will be what happens when what they call Gen Alpha emerges and their conflict. What I see is that there's a conflict. The conflict jumps a generation. So boomers are in conflict with millennials. Gen Xers are in conflict with Gen Zers. I think that's where I see those dividing lines. So in talking with, I'll give you a more precise answer. So I spent 3 months in Wyoming last fall, and I was having conversations with people in Cody, where I spent 2 months. And one of the persons I talked to was a woman who had closed her restaurant that she had been running for 30 years, something like
Mm,
that. And she closed it because she couldn't get good workers and couldn't get workers who knew how to work.
mm,
That was the way she described it.
mm,
And so I was meeting Gen Zers and millennials in other environments while I was there, and I'm asking them about that. So what do you think? Do you think that you all are not prepared to go to work? And they said, no, we don't really have any problems with work. We have problems with how we're treated, and that we want we want. I mean, they just don't want to work in an environment where they feel oppressed or feel put down or constantly under judgment,
mm,
and so they don't feel like they need to work. That's the odd thing about it.
mm,
And so I was in another group. I was doing a workshop with a group, and I laid this out and I said, here are the 2% perspectives. Here's the older perspective of these people. These young people don't know how to work. They're lazy, et cetera, et cetera. And here's the perception of the young people is that what they're asking us to do doesn't make sense to us, basically. And so there's this difference. And so what are we going to do about this? Are we going to do something where we bring these two generations together and have them to begin to talk to with one another and maybe figure out why things are not working? No one was interested in that. No one, I mean, they said, oh, that's, that's sounds like, but no one felt the impetus to say, oh, that really makes sense. I'm going to go do something. And
mm.
so I think we're still in a transition point, and in an almost it's that our generation has to finally retire and
Mhm.
turn it over to the younger generations where we really see some real change.
Yeah, we're kind of going to be forced to that at some point, I suppose. But yeah, I take your point. I wonder sometimes when you kind of realize that not only we all do this. It's not just one or two of us, but we all start off at least by modeling the thinking process of someone else, the motivations on ourselves. And very often we forget that we're doing that and just carry on doing it. And it actually, I think, only kind of a tiny proportion of us, uh, through experiences or therapy or whatever, get to kind of understand the huge differences there can be in the mental framework that people and motivations and values that they're using. And given the differences in perspective, and these have to be taken seriously and given validity, because what my perspective is my perspective. You might not like it, someone else might not like it, um, but it's my perspective. You can be wrong about facts, I can be wrong about objective things, but if I've got a perspective, I've got a perspective. This is an incredibly important factor, and it sounds like it's being way neglected, isn't it?
Oh, I think it is. It has been, yeah. I think that, and I think I mean, this goes back to when I first started consulting, and I realized that the obstacle was the greatest obstacle to any change is the persistence of the structure of an organization,
Mm,
and that how you let me pose it this way: how would you take a traditional institution, corporate business structure, and transform it into a community, a partnership between generations? How would
mm,
you go about doing that
mm,
if you're the CEO and you don't even understand what that transition actually means? See, I think that's kind of where we're stuck. All the ways we've trained people to be managers
mm,
worked while we were in the industrial model, but now we're moving into what I would say is much more of communal model or a network of relationships model context where people are going to collaborate, they're going to work together, they want to talk together, want to, they want to, and what is needed is levels of respect and trust exhibited between people.
Mm.
How we make that transition, I think, is one of the big questions that we're going to face over the next half century.
Yeah, it's way up there in the top level, isn't it? Um, I think one of the things I've learned over the years, and it's certainly true of science, but is also true in other realms as well, is that change and shifts in paradigm almost always come from the outside. So it's incredibly difficult for the incumbent, the CEO, the board, even the management, to kind of take that framework to make those kind of paradigm shifts. And in the corporate world, I guess a lot of the time that happens by, new companies coming along and doing that. Obviously, it's that doesn't happen in the same way with the society. Um, but what I'm thinking about here is, as part of my experience, I've worked a lot in innovation, and in one particular area, we might have touched on this last time, I think, but we found that innovation was hitting a brick wall in the UK because of our financial regulator, and well, we needed to, but I kind of took it on as something to try and do something about this. I'm not the CEO. I have no control over any of that, and basically came up with an approach that turned out to be successful in changing the nature of the beast in terms of innovation, i.e. welcoming it, by creating what I would now call a micro institution, an innovation unit that's now being copied elsewhere. And the reason I mention this is I later learned that from writings of Václav Havel and others from the Soviet times, the Soviet bloc, they did something quite similar. They had something they call parallel structures. So instead of being in order not to be drawn into that, the equivalent of that corporate culture or the propaganda that kind of draw you in to give you that, that thought patterns and identity, they knew that they had to link minds. They knew they had to talk to one another, and actually very similar to the way you were describing the role, the prophetic role. Actually, that's a prophetic role, isn't
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
of
yeah.
the chief, in order to do that. And I've come to think and believe that that's why how and why the Berlin Wall came down. And if you kind of look at the history of that, there were a few slip-ups on the part of the bureaucracy, but there were enough people who were already primed and ready to go and saw an opportunity to make it to the West, and to bring the wall down. A snowball became an avalanche. And again, the reason I mention this is it almost feels a little bit about what, in what you're describing as the hope, but also the discontent, the cry for agency. It looks a little bit like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It really does. And we can either take that as a negative or take it as a positive. That cry for it's a cry, and I take it as a positive because it's going to invite change to happen.
Mm.
And I think it's happening already. I mean, I'm the things I hear people that I've known for a while, the things they're saying now, even as opposed to a year ago, is I'm really kind of stunned. I feel like um, there are levels of change happening that are outside of our field of vision. And if we pay too much attention to what appears in the media and on social media, that we'll never be able to see that which is going on. But I'll give you an example. One of those things, and I see people talking more and more about defining what their purpose is, of having purpose.
Mm.
And I initially became aware of this 2 years ago when I talked with some students at St. Gallen University in Switzerland. And I'm just having a conversation like we're having a conversation, and I'm asking them questions, and they said, well, kind of the summary was, we're disappointed in the way the world works. We're afraid we have fear about the future, and we want to know what it means to have purpose. Wow. So when you start asking the question about what is my purpose, how does the company answer that question? Is your purpose to have a paycheck? Is it to go in and spend 8.5 hours a day at your desk doing this may be the benefit of AI, which is it will take away all those jobs and really open people up to trying to find new things to do. Maybe. I don't know. So
Yeah.
I think this idea that people looking for purpose really is kind of the key to a lot of this.
Yeah. In our lifetime, we touched on this earlier, and I think we're probably coming almost to the end of our time. You're going to have to be the time master on this.
Yeah, we've got a couple more minutes.
Yeah, but in my lifetime, we've had more than one variation, at the very minimum would be a way of putting it, of capitalism.
Yeah.
And the phase we're in now is very different to how it was sort of 50 plus years ago. I think of it now as financialism. We haven't got time to get into that particularly now, but I was having a conversation yesterday, and someone said to me, Barry, do you think the the form of society and capitalism we have currently, do you think it's sociopathic? And the answer is actually absolutely, it is sociopathic. It's a sociopathic at its core. The idea that you would maximize GDP at the expense of the population, which is actually the reality, is intrinsically sociopathic. The idea that you put, those things before people. And the reason I mention this is because I didn't expect to come to this conversation and be asking the question, but I've got some answers. And some hope that I didn't have before, Ed. I think you're incredibly well placed to see those things that you've described, those cracks, and I think that it's a very positive thing, because I think that humanity has been driven out during that period. And I think what we're seeing, I have to ask you the question, maybe this is the last question. A part I always ask when I'm interviewing, what would be the final thought you'd like to leave from this session with people who are viewing or listening? So we'll bank that for a moment too. Humanity, could this be a resurgence of humanity?
The simple answer is yes. The complex answer is, without a doubt, we're in a stage of human history where we have been in a cycle of repetitive social functions, engineer, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this is a cycle that goes back 3,000 or 4,000 years.
Okay.
where those in power and those who controlled the wealth and those who controlled the technology dictated how everybody else would live.
Mm.
There's some things that I've seen recently where there is some anthropological work that is uncovering things about civilizations that were kind of pre-hierarchical, let's call it that.
Wow. Okay.
And what they're saying about that is that these large civilizations operated in collections of small units.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, are they wish fulfilling? Are they trying to read into the data? I don't know. I have no way of knowing. But if there was something before the hierarchical pyramidal structure emerged, what would that look like? And maybe this is what we're seeing is a return to something similar to that, in that this hierarchical notion of the few running the world or running the thing for the whole, for the many, is no longer an adequate or an effective mechanism for a society, and
Yeah.
that what is going to emerge is not flat. It's more like it's more hilly, pockets of groupings of people, and in one of my conversations this week with one of the guests, I made that point, and they said, well, that's exactly what you have with criminal cartels. I
Mhm.
said, yeah, well, that's right, but are they sustainable? And so I see that there was this lack of sustainability in the structures that we have in society, and that and this this there's a strong, within the technology world, there's a strong transhumanist philosophy that's under experimentation, shall we say.
Yeah.
I think it's ultimately unworkable, because it makes assumptions about progress that I think
Mhm.
are not sustainable or founded. So
Yeah.
I think that it's not the I don't think what the future looks like is the triumph of the individual. I think what the future looks like is the joining of individuals into communities. I call them networks of relationships, but those where together they collaborate to deal with the problems that exist in their local communities. And it may be that the generational effect of that, say the Gen Zers, it may be their lack of endorsement of baby boomer and Gen X culture is the signal that the future is going to look much more like what they see than what you and I have experienced.
Yeah.
And 20 years ago, I mean, I'm so one slice of my world is that of Christianity and of the church, and I saw that what was happening within the church in the modern world was it had adopted the structures of the modern institution.
Yeah.
And at the turn of the millennium, I had this notion that emerged that all these institutional structures are going to fail, and what emerges will be something more akin to a community, and that the church, which had begun as a community 2,000 years ago, would be the kind of the seedbed for what it is like to live as a community.
Mhm.
And people all over the world. I know people all over the world, and we support one another. We talk
Mhm.
with one another. We encourage one another. We champion each other's work,
Yeah.
and there's something to that is the ground for which we build whatever the future actually looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, just a couple of observations on that. And one is that, the word humanity, I guess, is has many connotations and context. But when I think about it, I'm thinking both about the approach of people to one another and the rest of the human race, and the human race as a whole, and also the kind of community and structure and so on. The other observation is this, that we now know very clearly, via, if nothing else, the Dunbar numbers, that there are real, shapes to human groups and societies. There's a
Right.
kind of break point at about 12, where of a sort of close circle, and then it's about 200, 250 of, the which kind of indicates, hierarchies are in many ways an imposition, I guess, from that point of view. And cellular is how life works. And it's how communities naturally work.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure they really work any other way. So those are my observations. Please come back on them finally if you'd like to. It's your show. But let me ask you that other question. We talked about hope, and we wanted to talk about hope here. If there's one thing that you'd like to leave at the end of this show for people to take away and maybe to mull on, what would it be?
I would say that what you discover in your direct interactions with people is a greater indication of what the future is than whatever you will find on social media or in the media at large. And so if you really want to understand the future, go talk to your neighbor, go talk to your children, go talk to your grandchildren. Because I think that is where the future will be created. It's not, I mean, what we're doing is as close to a direct relationship interaction as you can get online. And now, if we were together in the same place, sitting in a pub over on the Thames, having a pint together, that would only enhance the conversation we've had, but it would still be pointing us to what the future could be. And so that's I have not framed this in this way exactly, but I think it's whoever you have a direct relationship with, that's what your life is going to be like in the future if you choose for it to be that way. And that to me excites me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great thought to end on. But let me just say this, that we should make that happen. So this is an official invite. And we've got some other rivers as well we could probably visit, and most of them have a pub associated. So I'm buying. Let me know when you're coming. I'll see you there.
I guarantee you with that. But let me finish with this. When I started the podcast a year ago, February of a year ago, I had no idea where it was going to go. But overwhelmingly, the response has been, this is a signal to what is possible. And to hear that from a wide variety of people, many that you know, is an extraordinarily humbling thing, because I feel like I'm the dog that caught the tire on the truck, and now I've got to stay up with whatever this momentum is. And so I'm really grateful for the people who have come on and have talked with me, but also have encouraged this thing to be what it is. And you're one of those, and I'm very grateful for that.
Well, again, this took a turn neither of us, I think, was expecting, but it's been immensely enjoyable for me, and hopefully shining some new illumination. It has for me. I hope it has for listeners as well. But back to you to close the show. It's your show. Thank you for having me.
Barry. Thank you, Barry, and thank you everyone for watching. And we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye-bye.